Jay Towns is accused of killing Bud and June Runyon in 2015.
Back in 2022, Lancia was sentenced to 5 years in prison after he admitted to shooting at a rival who was driving by the Messer Street Clubhouse in 2019.
Several members of the Hells Angels Sonoma County chapter will face a federal judge tomorrow and Monday for arraignment. They're named in 11 grand jury indictments.
The verdicts dropped. Life without parole, again and again. Some Hells Angels stared in shock. Others clenched their fists. These weren't street punks. These were gang leaders, legends, and now they were being locked away forever. How did the most feared biker gang on earth end up like this?
The trial of 49 alleged members of a criminal gang linked to the Hells Angels began on Monday at a packed session of Spain's High Court. It's taking place almost a decade after police clamped down on the group's activities on the resort island of Mallorca.
Stephen Sanders used to be the guy you didn't question in the San Diego chapter of the Hells Angels. He wasn't just a member, he was the president, the top man. For years, he carried the kind of reputation that made people think twice before crossing him. But in court, all of that power crumbled. Sanders was sentenced to 25 years in state prison for a long list of serious crimes. And by the time the verdict was read, the courtroom felt like the final nail in the coffin of his outlaw legacy. Prosecutors laid out a disturbing timeline. Sanders had kidnapped 2 people, attacked partygoers with a deadly weapon, robbed victims using force, and even tried to have witnesses and investigators killed while already facing charges. This wasn't just one bad night. It was years of violence stacked on top of each other. During the hearings, it became clear that the authorities had been tracking him for a while. The district attorney's office teamed up with the DEA to build the case, and their work paid off. Even with all the evidence against him, Sanders tried to draw a line in the sand. He admitted to the crimes, yes, but insisted that he never called the Hells Angels a criminal street gang. It was a strange hill to die on, and the judge wasn't having it. His lawyer tried to get the guilty plea withdrawn, claiming that new witness testimony had come to light. But again, the court rejected the motion. Too little, too late.
Jay Towns is accused of killing Bud and June Runyon in 2015. He allegedly lured the couple from Cobb County to Telfair County to buy a car from him.
The district attorney is seeking the death penalty.
Jay Witt probably thought no one would find out, or at least not in a way that would stick. But the courtroom had receipts, hard evidence, hours of surveillance footage, and a chilling timeline that linked him directly to the 2013 killing of fellow Hells Angels member William Furlong. And when the jury delivered the verdict, it wasn't just a conviction. It was the end of his road. Witt was sentenced to 30 to 40 years behind bars. And although he'll be eligible for parole after 7.5 years, his future is as uncertain as it gets. The story starts inside a Hells Angels clubhouse in Nebraska. Furlong was found dead with a single gunshot wound, and the scene looked like chaos. But investigators weren't convinced by what they saw. Surveillance cameras showed Witt and his girlfriend arriving early that morning, and hours later, they were seen leaving with a plastic bag. The kicker? Witt was caught wiping down door handles and surfaces, clearly trying to erase his presence. The final image showed him driving off in a Chevy Cruze with out-of-state plates.
The court's intent is to try to move this case forward to start in jury selection in December.
Prosecutors argued that Witt staged the scene to look like rival gang violence. That theory didn't hold in court, and it didn't help him either. As more details came out about the fight between Witt and Furlong, about the suspicious cleanup, the defense ran out of ways to spin the story. In the end, Witt pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the slaying charge was dropped. But that didn't soften the blow. The sentence was heavy, and the courtroom knew it.
The defense and prosecutors gave their final statements this morning while the DA was explaining Hall's movements at the time of the disappearance and killing of the 3 victims. Hall interrupted.
Adam Lee Hall's case isn't just one of the darkest in Hells Angels history. It's one of the most disturbing crimes Massachusetts has seen in decades. The details still haunt people years later. In 2011, during Hurricane Irene, Hall and 2 other men lured 3 Pittsfield residents. David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell into a trap. What happened next was brutal. The 3 victims were tortured, killed, dismembered, and buried in shallow graves in the woods near Beckett. And this wasn't just a murder, it was methodical and merciless. The judge called it heinous, and even that word didn't seem strong enough.
On Sunday afternoon, to meet with you.
20 miles away at a barbecue shop.
Now, Hall and 2 other men are charged with killing David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell.
Hall wasn't a fringe figure either. He was a ranking member of the local Hells Angels chapter, and someone who clearly knew how to operate in the shadows. At first, he was given 5 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. That sentence was recently reduced to 4, but it doesn't change what happened, or how it shook the state. During the trial, witnesses described terrifying scenes and disturbing behavior. The victims didn't just die, they suffered. The families sat in court, listening to every awful detail, and when the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder, the pain in the room was visible.
And cursed at the DA, claiming he was nowhere near the victims at the time.
Hall didn't flinch. He sat stone-faced, showing almost no emotion as his life behind bars was sealed. The Supreme Judicial Court later upheld the murder convictions, though they removed 1 kidnapping charge. But even that small legal adjustment didn't matter much. He's not getting out.
Joseph Lancia was unable to keep the peace while free on another case when he got into trouble in a fight at the Providence Strip Club over the weekend.
But Lancia's attorneys say the Hells Angels leader was defending his fellow club members when he threw the punch that knocked another man out.
Joseph Lancia walked into court, calm, quiet, and surrounded by a wall of loyalty. A dozen Hells Angels filled the courtroom benches in full patch jackets. Watching one of their own, the president of the Rhode Island chapter faced the music. But if anyone expected drama or last-minute statements, they didn't get it. Lancia stood in front of the judge, said nothing, and listened as his fate was handed down. 5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. No tears, no apology, just silence.
Back in 2022, Lancia was sentenced to 5 years in prison after he admitted to shooting at a rival who was driving by the Messer Street Clubhouse in 2019 and later knocking out a bouncer at the Cadillac Lounge strip club. But Lancia successfully convinced the parole board he had reformed himself and he was released from the ACI in June.
His charges stemmed from a June 2019 incident that could have ended very differently. According to prosecutors, Lancia fired a gun at a truck driven by Richard Starnino, a former Hells Angels prospect who had fallen out with the club. Starnino was just driving past the clubhouse on Messer Street when the shots were fired. It wasn't a random act. This was personal. And to make things worse for Lancia, the whole thing was caught on video. But not just any video. Security footage from the Hells Angels' own clubhouse cameras. The very place meant to protect them ended up sealing the case.
Lancia's attorney Lisa Hawley declined to comment. A parole violation hearing is scheduled for next month.
Lancia eventually took a plea deal, admitting to felony battery and carrying a firearm without a license. In exchange, the more serious charges, like firing a gun during a violent crime, were dropped. It was a calculated move to avoid a much longer sentence. If the case had gone to trial, he could have faced up to 61 years. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. She reminded Lancia that if he violated his release in any way, even by being 5 minutes late, he'd be looking at the full 18-year maximum. That warning hung in the air, but Lancia gave no reaction. His crew didn't stir either. It was one of those moments where the silence felt louder than any words.
Several members of the Hells Angels Sonoma County chapter will face a federal judge tomorrow and Monday for arraignment. They're named in 11 grand jury indictments that include charges of murder, home invasion robbery, and extortion.
The Sonoma County Hells Angels didn't wait for outsiders to come after them. They turned on one of their own. Joel Silva, once a trusted member of the California chapter, was marked for removal. According to prosecutors, Silva had become a problem. Someone the club no longer trusted. Instead of handling it quietly or pushing him out, 3 members, Jonathan Nelson, Russell Ott, and Brian Wendt, took a darker route. They set a trap, told Silva he needed to sort things out with the Fresno chapter and had him meet with them to resolve the issue. But the meeting wasn't about fixing anything, it was a setup. When Silva showed up in Fresno, he didn't walk out. Authorities say Wendt shot him in the head on the spot. The next day, his body was taken to a crematorium and destroyed. No funeral, no goodbye, no trace. It was a calculated, cold decision made by people who were supposed to be his brothers. That move didn't just send shockwaves through the biker world. It also put a massive target on the Sonoma County Club. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.